Hi, this is Claire DeMars, and welcome to The Warbird Mistress. For this first video, we're covering one of my favorite quirky aircraft from World War II, really an interwar aircraft, the last biplane that the United States Navy ever took into its inventory, and that would be the Curtiss SBC Helldiver. Now, the Helldiver was originally designed as a parasol wing monoplane. It's called the XF-12C1, so it was a fighter originally. This was for a 1932 request from the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics. It was for a high-powered fighter. But instead, it would become the Curtiss SBC Helldiver. This was a biplane, of course. They went back to biplane design. And it was supposed to be a scout bomber as well as a dive bomber. So it was first flown in 1935 and entered service in 1937. She was a two-seat craft of all-metal construction with fabric control surfaces. She had retractable gear, sliding canopy, and a three-blade variable pitch constant speed propeller, driven by the powerful 825 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1535-94 14-cylinder twin-row air-cooled engine. Well, it was powerful for then. The SBC Helldiver carried a single .30 caliber gun in the nose and another in a flexible position for the radio operator, who also acted as the rear gunner. One feature was that the gun could be stowed inside the rear cockpit when not needed. That would give it a smoother line and would also make dive bombing a lot easier. The payload was either a 500-pound bomb or a 45-gallon fuel tank on a centerline cradle designed to prevent the bomb from striking the aircraft when dropped. She had a top speed of 220 miles per hour, with a cruising speed of 175 miles per hour, an operational range of 405 miles. The primary purchase orders were for the Navy and Marine Corps. 83 SBC-3s were first ordered in 1936 and delivered in 1937, and they first went to Yorktown's Scouting 5. Now, what's funny is that the Yorktown had not been launched yet, but their units were being prepared for when it would go into action. So it was putting the cart before the horse, but at the same time, this is a really interesting part of history because the aircraft carrier was being designed in its own kind of haphazard way. It was after the Washington Treaty, and we had agreed that we would have our carriers that were originally designed to be battleships, battlecruisers, and they kind of tossed that together. America didn't have a true aircraft carrier designed to be an aircraft carrier until the Ranger, and that was not really a success story. The SBC-3 was to outfit the Enterprise's Scouting 6, the Saratoga's Scouting 3, and single examples were given to Bombing 3, Fighting 3, and Fighting 6. These were usually used as hacks, or commander aircraft. The Yorktown and Enterprise would launch their SBC-3s in the first practical demonstrations of hydraulic flush-deck catapults. They catapulted aircraft from the hangar deck as well as from the regular deck. So you had aircraft being catapulted out of the hangar. It was the SBC-3 and Vaught's O3U-3, that was an amphibian observation aircraft, that were the first aircraft to really be catapulted from a carrier. It was on the 4th of August, 1939. So when you consider that it was only a month before the war would break out, that was actually pretty innovative for the time. In the United States Navy, the Helldiver served alongside the SB-2U Vindicator and the TBD Devastator in the carrier strike elements. What it replaced was Vaught's SBU Corsair dive bomber. Now notice that we have scouting units and bombing units. Bombing units were considered the real strike force. They were to go out and carry out level and dive bombing activities. All carrier tactics focused on the torpedo bomber. Now, we'll save it for another day, but that was really a problem in America because we had the TBD Devastator, which was hopelessly outclassed, and we also had a torpedo that did everything but work. So at this point, the scout bomber's job was to really go out in elements or small formations, even individually, and look for targets or basically act as reconnaissance in force, while also supporting the bombing units. So you have this biplane dive bomber, along with a monoplane dive bomber, and what was then still just going out of date TBD Devastator torpedo bomber. Now, the funny thing is that the Vindicator was only 16 miles an hour faster, and as could be expected of a monoplane, it had a slower rate of climb. Although it did possess 200 miles greater range, and the Vindicator was the first aircraft to safely dive at above 200 miles per hour in a bombing attack. So we really have two aircraft doing very similar work. Ironically, it was the bomber that had the greater range, not the Scout. Now, the only carrier to receive the upgraded SBC-4, which was ordered in January of '38 with further orders in July and August for 124 in total, would be the Lexington. The SBC-4 now had a 950 horsepower Wright 1820-22 engine. The nose gun was changed to a 50 caliber, so it had a little bit more punch, especially you look at a 50 caliber bullet and you look at a 30 caliber bullet. The 50 caliber round is much larger, has a lot more penetrating power. The payload was also doubled, so now it does have the same payload as the Vindicator, has a single 1,000-pound bomb on this centerline cradle, and the top speed had increased to 234 miles per hour. Cruising speed was still recommended at 175. At the time, despite it looking like an obsolescent piece of the past, it really was comparable to other aircraft serving. And you look at the Henschel designs in Germany, you look at similar designs that were coming out, like the Gloucester Gladiators, really a contemporary of the SBC. You have a lot of producers over the world that are still looking at biplanes. It's the end of the biplane era, but they can still compete with monoplanes. And that's definitely true of the SBC-4. So now, as much as the Helldiver was a popular airframe with its pilots and with squadron leaders, it was already obsolescent because with the new monoplanes coming in, they had greater payloads, they were faster, and they were more rugged. One Marine who was given a Helldiver in December of 1941 said he was afraid to be in an aircraft that the control surfaces could catch fire. He felt unsafe in it. So we're looking at, people see the monoplane as a more modern, safer aircraft. And pilot confidence matters a lot, so that's important here. 23 reserve scouting squadrons would receive then 1 to 4 examples of 39 allocated to 11 Naval Reserve air bases in 1940. By 1940, the SBC is already being replaced by Douglas's SBD Dauntless. But the idea was to give it to the reserve scouting squadrons, let them become familiar with dive bombing tactics, and see how well we could prepare a pool of reserve pilots should we enter the war. Now, although the plane was shown in the 1941 Errol Flynn film Dive Bomb, no longer the Navy or Marine Corps' dive bomber by December of 1941. Now, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, there were still 69 SBC-3s and 118 SBC-4s in service. 55 of these were stationed at Naval Air Station Miami as trainers. They were used as intermediate trainers for people going to dive bombing squadrons to get both pilots and gunners used to dive bombing procedures and scouting procedures. The USS Hornet had yet to have theirs replaced, and both Bombing 8 and Scouting 8 were equipped with SBC-4s. Bombing 8 had 19 and Scouting 8 had 20. And they would stay with the Hornet until March of 1942. The Helldiver's career, however, was nowhere near over. Now, the Marine Corps had 23 SBC-4s in inventory on that December morning. 11 were stateside, and 12 were assigned to VMO 151. Now, they were deployed in May of 1942 to American Samoa. The squadron was renamed VMSB 151, and it wouldn't be until the end of 1942, in December 1942, that they would have theirs replaced. Now, the final SBC in Marine Corps service outside of training was with VMSB 151. That was replaced by an SPD Dauntless on the 1st of June, 1943. The Marines continued to use a dozen at Naval Air Station Jacksonville as dive bombing trainers until the 31st of October, 1944. And that's really the Marines doing their best with what they had, and they served well in American Samoa. Pilots liked them. They were dated but effective, and they did the role that they were designed to do. In the end, it was 151 that would see the SBC-4 in its final days. With 257 constructed and 207 seen in American service, the SBC-3 and the upgraded -4 served for 5 years in the Department of the Navy. The final biplane ordered by the Navy for combat purposes, it was perhaps the apex of pre-war dive bombing prowess. It provided a stable bombing platform and a payload equal to the much more modern Vought SB-2U Vindicator alongside which she had served. The Helldiver title was already a couple generations old in Curtiss designs. This was the final example, and it's sad that it didn't see as much operational use even in smaller conflicts because there was a lot for it to offer. Not the Navy's ideal purchase at the time, they wanted a monoplane, but it was one that served them well. And that's the story of the SBC Helldiver. Now, pay attention to whatever's going to be coming up next. I hope to have live action videos instead of just a soundtrack. We're going to move forward with that. Any suggestions, comments, etc., personally respond to every single one, I promise. This is Claire, and I am the Warbird Mistress. Take care. Take care.